Now when Jesus saw the crowds, he went back on a mountainside and sat down. His disciples came to him, and he began to teach them, and he said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." John chapter 11, verses 17 through 32. On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been there, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." And Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not yet entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died."
You may be seated. I want to let you know, as a special side note from today's message, that when I scheduled this, put this on the preaching schedule about sharing grief, I did not know the events that were going to occur last evening. That was totally coincidental. But John warned me not to bring that up, so I said I wouldn't do it during my message, so there's your side note. Friends, anyone who knows me, especially recently, my secretary at my last church said to me, "Is there anywhere you don't go without a coffee cup in your hand?" And my love for coffee wasn't always as avid as it is today, but it was heightened quite a bit. I mean, I drank a little bit when I was at Honda. You know, you're in these long meetings, and it's the only thing that's offered, and so if you're thirsty, coffee's it. So I figured out how to eat it, but as the years went on, there was this couple guys who were in my department that played guitar, and they got invited or somehow hooked up with a coffee shop at Bell Fountain. And so they invited people from the department kind of go and kind of have an experience, kind of a Simon and Garfunkel type of night, I don't know. John Denver, right? There you go, Danny. Had to throw his reference in there just for you, baby. So, anyways, we went to this coffee house, and we were listening to music, and one of the guys in my department was sitting there, and he looked over, and he's like, "I think I know that lady over there who owns this place." So we went over, ventured over, and we sat down and we talked to the woman. And the story that she told us was quite amazing. Dave, the guy who I was with, said, "Did you go to school together?" She goes, "Yes, we did." He goes, "I don't remember you too well." And she said, "Well, I didn't graduate. Like many rural ladies, I chose at about 16 years old to marry my husband and to become a farmer's wife. And was blessed to be in that beautiful ministry, which it really is, for many years." And she said, "We raised 3 lovely kids, and he said, 'How did you end up getting in the coffee business?' She said, 'Well, that's an interesting story. After about 34 years of marriage, our last child graduated and moved on to college. husband and I found ourselves empty nesters. 3 months later after that, he told me that he just didn't feel the love anymore. And he moved on. So here I was left, a person without a high school degree. The only thing I knew was being a farmer's wife, kicked off the farm, and wondering how I was going to sustain myself in future years. Her cousin happened to run a coffee house in Plain City. And in the midst of the struggles of trying to figure out what a new career would look like, she was talking to him at a family reunion. He said, you know what, in your town, why don't you pick a little storefront in Bell Fountain? And this guy has been roasting coffee daily, every day, or at least most days, for years. He said, I've burned through all the bad equipment. I know what the good equipment is. And he goes, I can set you up. You can make money and sustain yourself. So she got into the coffee business, bought a couple of knickknacks, like hallmarky things, and spread them out, and people come every day and enjoy coffee. And I thought a lot about her this week. Because I thought a lot about the loss that she experienced in those tragic changes of life. Normally when we talk about grief, I think we might kind of associate ourselves with the loss of a loved one, a pet, a family member, a friend. We probably have all known someone who's passed away way too early. So much more life, so much more potential. But I want us also to recognize other forms of loss. Those that are maybe more universal to us and just as damaging to our spirit. Maybe like this woman, you've experienced the loss of a dream. Maybe the circumstances of life have come at you. I've known ladies that have lost their mothers at early ages and have left whatever their potential future career might be to raise the family, to cook and clean at an age way too young for a woman, young girl, to accept the responsibilities of the head female in the household. Maybe there was a hope and a dream of what you might become or achieve in your life, a passion, and circumstances of caregiving or lack of finances have restricted your ability to fulfill that dream. Maybe there was a relationship that you had placed your whole soul upon, and you've lost the love of your life and marriage and all the commitments that were made. Maybe one day you came to work and experienced the news that your services were no longer necessary or needed, and you wondered, like this gal did, what your career might look like. Maybe through an accident, an illness, an injury in some way, you've experienced the loss, in part or in whole, of your independence, and now others are caring for you. Maybe you as a couple have lost a child that hasn't been carried to full term, or has been born in some way challenged and could only live a few days or a few years. So much potential left unlived. Maybe there are ways in which, through poor choices and bad decisions in your life, you've lost a belief in yourself. Your reputation has in some way been damaged. There's some ways in which you don't believe that you're the person that you used to be. You can't overcome it. See, life and loss and grief in some way impact all of us. What do we do in our moments of grief? Jesus is again standing on the mountain as he's sharing the Beatitudes, and he said, "Blessed you who mourn, for you will be comforted." It's a very strange week for me, as I think of the week coming up and the loss. I don't know about you, but I know in 9/11, if I were to be kind of a little bit transparent, I lost a sense of security in my homeland when those events occurred. What seemed impossible just became probable. And I know inside a little bit, just an assumption that things would always be safe just became a little bit too real. But that might not be the case. Maybe there are people in your life like there are in ours that are starting to feel or are in the midst of the ravishes of hurricanes. Whether you have relatives in Texas, I do, who were affected by Harvey, whether you have relatives in Florida, like we do, who are decided to stay behind. Maybe you have relatives that are first responders in those situations, and you're wondering what the loss might look like. But we wait anxiously, watching the news about every hour to see if the updates are, waiting for the next text of a loved one that lives in Orlando. Not quite in the worst part, but enough to make you nervous. This week, my mother passed away a little over a year and a half ago. She was a nurse and wanted to give back even upon her death. And so she committed her body to science, which means she was a cadaver in medical school. I never remembered this. I was told this about 2 days before her passing. And we got the call that the university is done with her remains, and so her service with her class will be a interfaith service on Friday. And we hope that we'll finally close a chapter in our grief as well. So how ironic that as I sat here and thought about grief, I thought about all the different ways in which life's challenges can come upon us, can overwhelm us. Grief is experienced, I think, universally. I don't think we ever get to escape it. And while I've said these words many times to families in the wake of saying goodbye to a loved one that's passed, I always wish I knew the author of these words, but you know, I believe it to be true. Tears are the price we pay for loving. So if we experience life and loving, and I hope we all do, then we are going to, at some point, have to say goodbye. And that process is so individual, there's really kind of no roadmap on how to do it. We identify stages that people go through, but really kind of no time frame on how it'll work. And so I know there's probably some that are sitting here today, just like there were in Jesus' day, who have heard the words, "Blessed are you who mourn, for you will be comforted." And I wondered for a minute, how is that comforting? You know, the Beatitudes are such a strange little set of sayings. Jesus says, "I am with you in your worst moments." And that's why we've called this series Altitude Adjustments. It's not as though we're lifted up any higher, but that God would come to the lowest point in our lives in these circumstances and comfort us. Of course, I thought of Lazarus, Jesus' own experience with him. Jesus knows what he's going to do with Lazarus. And in this case, especially within the culture of the day in Judaism, they believed that after 4 days, the soul left the body and went to its final resting place. So Mary and Martha find Jesus at a point in which they believe this really can't happen as far as physical resurrection on this day. What will we do? So Martha speaks. Jesus, if you had been here, I know that events would have been different. You would have calmed the storms of life, and we wouldn't be grieving the way that we are. Jesus reminds her of a lesson she's probably already heard. I am the resurrection and the life, and all who believe in me shall live. It's the story of our faith. We call it the good news. And you and I, if we have placed our faith, our trust in, our hope in the hands of the Master who experienced death and overcame it, we know when we experience death, we will overcome it. So for the faithful, funerals don't have to be sad events, but celebrations. Celebrations that when we move on, we no longer suffer. That when we move on, we no longer experience pain. When we move on, we get our new bodies. Man, I can't wait for the day for that to happen. Can I hear an amen? Amen. All right. I'm not the only one. That the day we pass, we will be reunited. So we don't have to fear death. We don't have to. I fear the dying process. I know many people that say, I just want to go to sleep at night, and then that's it. Doesn't always happen that way, folks. But I don't fear death. Do you? Or do you fear the death of someone you know yet to receive the gift of Christ? Death has its place in life. Grief is a part of it. But there's other things that I think you and I would agree need to die. Amidst the stories of the storms of life that rage our coasts, there also appears to be other storms in our nation and in our world. Could we choose in our daily walk today to put to death hatred, disdain for another, just because they're different or believe different things, speak in different ways, live a different life? Could we possibly for a moment choose love? Could we be resurrected or rise above low self-esteem? Places in our lives in which we find ourselves woefully inadequate. And accept the God who sees us just as we were created and loved to be. Could we put to death unforgiveness and rise in a new way, to let go of the hurts of what has been done to us and to live free from that? Not thinking that we're going to entrust ourselves again in those situations, but we're not going to allow it to drive our future. Could we put to death doubt, insecurity, unbelief, conditional Christianity? Okay, God, I'll do this when. Could we live within the new life that God has promised to each one of us? Could we finally be free through the comfort and the care that God gives us, whatever that lot is in life, wherever we find ourselves today? Could we dance at that funeral? Just as we do the loved ones, and in the difference, even amidst the circumstances and the storms of life that people see in us, could there be resurrection again? Maybe you've been carrying your grief, or your cross, or your burden, for far longer than 4 days. Friends, I just came as the band comes forward together in our responsiveness. I just stopped by today to let you know Jesus said, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me, even though they die, will live forever. Jesus turns to Martha and says, do you believe this? So the question I have for you today is, do you believe it?
Yeah.
Because if you believe it, then I'm here to shed the good news. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Amen? Amen. Friends,